here, we'll check.
Yeah, I'm going to send out an email to everyone just to clarify. Yeah. Okay, so last lecture of the semester. Yay, we made it all the way through chapter 11. So chapter 11, it kind of ties in with the genetics that we've been talking about the last couple of lectures, and specifically we're going to talk about how evolution occurs. What is the mechanism of evolution? And there are several different mechanisms, the main one being natural selection. And as y'all probably know by now, natural selection is, certain individuals within an environment, those that have beneficial traits that help them better survive, are going to pass those traits on to their offspring. And the thought is that over time, over millions and millions of years, that evolution will take over, and if the trait is that beneficial, then it will be incorporated into almost all of the organisms within that population. So, Oh God, end of the semester. Okay. Natural selection, that's what I'm trying to say. So natural selection is a mechanism of evolution. Natural selection happens over shorter periods of time, like within generations, and then evolution occurs over millions and millions of years. So evolution takes a really, really, really long time. And so what we're going to talk about is different ways that we can, measure or determine what has evolved from the past. And so what evolution is, it's really just a change in gene frequencies. So we all have the same genome, right? We all have the same genes and, the same order of genes, the same chromosomes, whatever. But the way that those genes are expressed, meaning the genes that are turned on versus genes that are turned off, and then those special traits, like disease traits or unique traits that show up in individuals, those are going to be what fuels evolution. So evolution is all about increasing the genetic diversity. We've already talked about ways to increase genetic diversity through meiosis, also through this random fertilization. And so what evolution is, it's literally, there's some sort of change in an allele. So there's some sort of mutation, or something happens that affects all individuals. So this thing will happen, and then it's obviously going to be beneficial for not only that one individual, but then he's going to pass that on to his progeny, and then they're going to supposedly survive and then pass that on. And so this, over hundreds and hundreds of generations, the thought of evolution, all it is, it's a change of gene frequency. So let's just say I am a bacteria that does not like oxygen. Okay, I'm anaerobic and I'm a bacteria and I can only live without oxygen. What if there's a mutation in something that now allows me to breathe oxygen? But I'm the only individual that has that. And there's obviously oxygen everywhere, so that you would think that would be a beneficial trait. So what am I going to do? I'm going to replicate, I'm going to pass it on to all my offspring. And then they're going to pass it on to all my offspring. So it started off with just one mutation in one cell, but because it was beneficial, it spread throughout the whole population. So that's what we're talking about with a gene frequency. So when you're talking about the frequency of alleles, remember alleles are the versions of those genes. All evolution is the change of the percentage of those alleles within a population. And so this is affected, as you said, over millions and millions of years. And so Darwin is the guy who came up with the theory of natural selection. He took a trip on the HMS Beagle and went to the Galapagos Islands. He was actually called a naturalist. He wasn't really a biologist. He just kind of studied and was impressed by nature. And so when he was on the Galapagos Islands, he came across lots of different populations of various different organisms. He looked at the huge tortoises that get to be 100 years old, and he looked at finches, types of birds. He looked at iguanas and other type of reptiles, and he basically just made observations about the type of environment these organisms were living in and these special kind of adaptations that these organisms had adapted in order to survive these various different environmental conditions. And so in his observations, he made 3 different observations that ultimately led to his theory of natural selection. The first one is that all organisms are different. I mean, that's true for us, right? Some of us are tall, some of us are short. Light hair, dark skin, so forth and so on. So all organisms are, even though they have the same genome, they're all expressed differently, and so we all look and act a little bit different. And some of these variations, if they're beneficial to the survival, then they're going to be passed on to future generations. So that was the first observation. All right, so individuals are unique, and they have these traits, and if those traits are beneficial, they're going to be passed on to the offspring. Now, the second observation he's made is that, in the world, there are more organisms that are born than there are resources to take care of them. In other words, not everything that is born is going to live a nice, happy, beautiful life. All right? Sometimes there's an overpopulation. I mean, we have an overpopulation of humans right now as it speaks on Earth. But, this is true in the animal kingdom as well. If there gets to be too many of one type of animal, there's only limited resources. There's limited food, there's limited mates, there's limited shelter. So all of these resources, they are a very finite amount, and so it can only hold or help so many organisms survive. So those that are not capable of accessing those resources are going to be the ones that are going to die off. So in other words, although there's going to be lots of new organisms, popping out 12 kittens at a time, or, whatever. Say there's an overpopulation of rabbits, then those rabbits, because of limited resources, are going to have to compete with one another for those resources. And so this competition, it's this competition among organisms within a population that brings about, that selects for these beneficial traits to come out. So if I have two rabbits and they're competing for a food source, one rabbit has for whatever reason, his genetics gave him stronger muscles or longer legs. The thought is he's going to be able to run faster to get to that food or to run away from a predator or whatever compared to just a normal rabbit. And so that's increasing his survival. So the thought is, if he lives longer, he's going to reproduce more, and if he reproduces more, then he's passing that trait on to future generations. And so because these individuals compete with one another, that means, again, that you're selecting for these beneficial, these competitive traits to come out and give you an extra edge. So, an example, the rabbit getting, born with, bigger muscles or faster reflexes or something. But these three observations led to kind of two inferences that kind of mold the theory of natural selection. The first one is that within populations, these inherited characteristics, if they're better, then you will survive longer and you will produce more offspring. And the second one is, because of this environment and these limited resources and this selection for beneficial traits, this is promoting new changes in the genome. Because a lot of these traits, some of them can be bad, but some of them can be beneficial. And so there's a selection for natural selection to change some of these traits within a population. And once that happens over a long period of times, then that is evolution. So these three tenets right here, this is kind of his logical approach to how he came up with the theory of natural selection. And it's not like he was just there for a weekend. He was there for years and years and years and wrote a big old book on it. So I hate to, just summarize it down to three little statements because it seems oversimplified, but a lot of work went into him with these different observations. Okay, so now that we've established the theory of natural selection, now we need to talk about evolution. We said that evolution is a change in allele frequencies. So remember, alleles are different versions of genes, right? And so different allele frequencies are what lead to evolution. And there's two types of evolution. There's macroevolution and then there's microevolution. Macro means large or big in Latin. And so macroevolution is based on the appearance of new species and this long drawn out large scale events. Like for instance, what took out the dinosaurs, whether it was the Big Bang or whether it was a huge comet or the Ice Age, whatever it was that took them out, as a direct result of their extinction, that promoted the survival of mammals. Because in the time of the dinosaurs, when they were killed off, it was thought that there was a, the ice age, so to speak. So that means, because everything was cold, that individuals that had hair were going to be prone to survive more because they were kept warmer. So that's how mammals really took off in that, I think it's I want to say the Paleozoic, but that could be totally wrong. It is right? Okay, yay. So that's when you see this diversification of mammals, all because of this environmental pressure to survive the winters better. And so these organisms that, again, had this hair or layers of fat or whatever else that helped them survive these cold times, they were the ones that survived and started passing on their genes. And so if you look at the tree over all the different, eras that we've studied, you can see right after the dinosaurs, you can see this branching of all these different speciations that ultimately evolved from that one incident. So that would be an example of macroevolution. There's also microevolution. And this microevolution, this isn't over millions and millions and millions of years like the macro is. But what's going to happen is you have certain traits that can affect a population almost immediately. And so one example of this is there is an Amish community, and this is something that we'll talk about, but lots of Amish communities, they're isolated from everybody else. So there's lots of interbreeding between them, so to speak. And so they have a higher incidence of some of these less desired traits, but it's filling out through the population. And so this would be an example of, microevolution. And so we're going to go through and we're going to talk about different examples of each of these. But just to the point that these adaptations can help organisms survive better, there's lots of different examples of this. A lot of them have to do, initially, before animals were here at all, there were plants. So plants were the first living organisms on the planet. And these plants, they have to survive just like we have to survive. So they were able to adapt survival mechanisms as well. One of the ones that persisted, especially since plant life came out of the ocean and eventually made its way on land, you need the ability to disperse your seeds. Because plants in the ocean, they had water to carry around all their gametes and stuff. But on land, they didn't have that. So they had to adapt to their environment and come up with ways to better spread their seeds, so to speak, or spread their gametes. And so this is just an example. I know y'all know what these are. These little, I don't know what they're called, little dandelions. Yeah, there you go. You blow on them and then, yay, they blow up. Well, that's a survival mechanism. All right, they're shaped like that, like this little fan, so they'll be carried in the wind. And so that wind is going to help carry them to other plants and help fertilize that, so you get new dandelions. All right, same thing with pollen. Pollen is a male sperm of a flower. It's a gamete. And so bees and animals, in addition to wind, bees are beneficial to the fertilization of plants, because when they go in and they sit on a pretty little flower and they suck all the nectar or whatever they want out of there, and then they go and land on another flower, that's bringing literally that sperm from this flower to another flower. And so that's helping to pollinate, and it helps the survival of the plants. And so all around us, we have all sorts of different adaptations that allow us to survive better, plants included, as you can see in this example.
How does a plant know it needs to adapt like that to survive?
It's just this ingrained, everything wants to survive. Everything that's alive wants to survive. Mm-hmm. It's not like its brain, it's telling it, oh, I need to survive, so I'm going to, obviously plants don't have brains. But they have this intrinsic desire to survive, just like every organism does. Everything's going to fight to live. And it just knows. I don't have a good biological explanation. It's always been there. It will continue to be there. So take that for what it's worth. Not good enough for you?
I don't get the whole adaptation.
Well, okay. That's fair. I don't expect y'all to.
When I was in another environmental science, there was a plant that elongated itself so these birds couldn't get to its pollen. But then the bird elongates its you know.
Yeah, that's natural selection.
I know, but just how does the plant know it needs to elongate and then just elongate?
Don't focus on how the plant needs to know. I mean, I don't even know if they know how it knows, but it knows. Okay?
And then just to, how do you adapt? I mean, just, that's just, I don't know.
Well, we're gonna talk about some examples. Okay, this is an example right here. I think we've actually already talked about this, maybe in the very first chapter. Yeah. So this is bacteria. All right. This is obviously a nasty little wound or something. Got poked with a nail. Who knows? And there's bacteria on the nail, and it got into his cut. And so now you got all of these bacteria. He's got an infection. It feels like crap. Well, what happens if one of those bacteria has a mutation? And that mutation gives that bacteria resistance to a certain antibiotic. This happens all day, every day, all the time. I'm not just making this up. There are bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. That's why they're called antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And so people who, go to the hospital or go to the doctor for every little cold, cough, or flu, they keep taking antibiotics. And the more antibiotics you take, the more those bacteria get desensitized to them. So over time, they're just like, oh, I got this. I'm used to seeing this. I'm resistant to you now. So that's a big problem. Like MRSA, multiple resistant Staph aureus, super, super bad. Like if y'all watch football, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they had it going around their locker room. It's extremely lethal and extremely dangerous. But anyways, it's due to this not only over-prescribing of antibiotics, but most of the Americans or humans for that matter don't understand how all this mechanism works. So they think, oh, I'm sick. What do I do when I'm sick? I pop some pills. And that just makes the situation worse. But anyways, that's my spiel. Anyways, so this is the mechanism behind all that. And so you get sick, or not you get sick, but you have some sort of bacteria introduced into your system. You go to the doctor, or before you go to the doctor, doesn't matter. You take antibiotics, you don't take antibiotics. But say there's one of these bacteria that just has a mutation, boom, now it's resistant to antibiotics. And there is a gene, there are several genes that are transferred between bacteria that give them resistance. So there are specific resistance genes in bacteria. And so one of them can just turn itself on, get a resistance, and that's this red guy right here. So now, I'm coming to you. So now, this one guy's resistant and all the rest, they're still normal bacteria. Well, you start treating with antibiotics and you're killing all the normal bacteria. And the only ones that are surviving are these red guys. So you're selecting for more of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria when all you're trying to do is kill the bacteria in the first place. So collateral damage, so to speak. So at first you have a bunch of normal bacteria. And the antibiotics, we're killing those. We'd rather be killing this guy, but instead we're killing these guys. And so over time, because this is the guy that's surviving, he's passing on his traits, so that over time, almost all the bacteria are going to be antibiotic resistant. And it's so easy for one bacteria to transfer resistance to another. It happens on a daily basis. It's just take a little piece of DNA, they meet up, it goes through a magic little tube, goes into the other one, boom, now you've got antibiotic resistance. It probably takes like a minute for a bacteria to transfer antibiotic resistance to another bacteria. Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
Like I get bronchitis at least once a year, and after the second time, they stop being able to give me like the generic medicine, and they have to give me the stronger stuff, and now they have to give me the even stronger stuff.
Exactly.
And like every time I go in, they're now like, well, we're just gonna attack it with like everything. It's like, okay, well, what happens next year when I get it again? Because I can't. I'm susceptible to it. I get it every year.
And the other bad thing about, obviously bacteria, or resistant bacteria is a bad thing, but we have, normal bacteria in our body. I forget the stat. It's like within 1 centimeter of our small intestines, there's like 4 times as many people on the earth. So it's like billions and billions of bacteria in like this much. So there's more bacterial cells than there are our own cells. But, they're there for a reason. They help us do certain things. They help us digest cellulose. Because we don't have the capability, the enzyme, to break down cell walls. So when we eat vegetables and stuff, those bacteria, those help us digest that. And so when you're taking these antibiotics, you're often killing the good bacteria too. And so that leaves your good bacteria actually competes with the bad bacteria. So you'd much rather have your normal healthy bacteria fighting off potential invaders or pathogens, but when you take all these antibiotics, you're killing all of them. So you're killing some of your immunity as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the bacteria doesn't need to reproduce to pass on its ability to fight off antibiotics. It could just pass it on to someone else.
So it depends, and this is kind of getting a little into microbiology, but we talked about bacteria. They don't have a nucleus, obviously, and they've got this kind of round, circular genome. Well, they have these other little specialty pieces of DNA called plasmids, and these plasmids have certain genes on them that are, I want to say kind of special. One of them is resistance to genes, and so you have a bacteria that has this little piece of DNA with this little gene, and then you have another bacteria, and they meet up, and literally this unravels, goes in here. Boom, you've transferred resistance. That's one way to do it. Now, if this one has a mutation, and the mutation is, in its germline, so to speak, and then it reproduces, then yes, it's going to be passed on. So it depends on how it got that resistance in the first place. But with these resistance plasmids, yeah, they can just transfer from like one random bacteria to another. Or if they inherit a mutation, then it's going to be passed on. So it kind of depends. Other questions? Right. Okay. So, natural selection has the ability to select for certain characteristics during certain type of environmental conditions. And so, since environmental conditions are never really the same, they're constantly changing, that's why we see these constant change of different characteristics of different organisms within those environments. When Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands and he observed all these finches, he noticed that they all had different styles of beaks. And he thought to himself, well now, why wouldn't they all have the exact same beak? Well, again, this was part of his observation that all organisms are unique and different. And so, based on he hypothesized way back in the 1800s that those beaks were used for different environmental conditions. And so, depending on the environment, certain beaks would be beneficial, and then others might not be as beneficial. And so, later on, there are some scientists who actually tested this hypothesis. They followed finches over, I think it was like 30 years, and the different kinds of finches and the different kind of beaks they had. And so you can imagine over 30 years that there's all these changes in the environment. And so one of these changes that they traced was whether it was a drought season or whether it was a wet season. And so in the normal season, where you're not having to compete for water and everything, just normal happy birds, you see all sorts of beaks. You see large beaks, you see small beaks, you see skinny beaks, you see long pointy ones, so forth and so on. But then the minute you get into one of these dry seasons, now this increases the competition, right? Because resources are even more limited than they were before. So as a result of this, during the dry season, those that had the smaller beak were not able to, get underground and get worms or, do whatever birds do to survive. And so instead, you see that it's selecting against the birds with the short beak, and it's selecting for the birds with the long beak, because this one is better adapted to survive in dry conditions. And so now you can imagine if this dry season went back to a really wet season, then this guy would probably come back because he can survive just as well in a wet season. It's just when it's a dry season that he's not adapting as well. And so because of these various different traits, in this case, the trait we're talking about is the long beak versus the short beak. Those traits are going to be different in individuals because these individuals are competing. And so because of this competition, you're selecting for those beneficial traits in those organisms to help them better survive. And so this is an example, just like the bacteria was an example as well. Also, and I can't remember if this slide is in here or not, I don't think it is, but I want to give you an example anyways, because you said you were suspicious of examples, so.
Oh, well, I just don't get it. Wouldn't the adaptation of the longer beak just wipe out the shorter beak?
Not entirely, because it's not going to say a dry season. Now, if it was like some catastrophic event where, I don't know, some laser beam came and sucked up all the water and there was no water anymore, then yeah. But over time, because again, these environments fluctuate, you're going to have various different populations fluctuate with those conditions because of their various different traits. So it would, as long as it's a dry season, yeah, if the dry season was long enough, then yeah, these would outcompete and these would eventually dry. But normally, everything in the life is cyclical, right? Up and down, it always repeats. And so you don't end up with something for too long. And once this starts to, let's just say there's a dry period for 20 years, and these guys get down really, really low. Well, you gotta remember, he's part of the food chain too. So if he goes away, that means the bugs or worms or whatever that he normally eats, now they're gonna survive better, right? Because this predator is gone. So now those other little bugs, now they'll rise up. And so basically what I'm trying to say is the ecosystem has a way of balancing itself out whenever it gets to extremes like this. That's why there's not a whole lot of extinctions. Most of the extinctions are because of humans, because we've hunted them or we eat them or whatever reason, we want their furs or tusks or whatever. You know, most of the extinctions are due to human involvement. Now the dinosaurs, that was one of these catastrophic things that, you know, caused a blow up of different species. So it depends on what the effect is. But normally, on a normal basis, it all kind of works itself out, is what I'm trying to tell you. Instead of, because you can imagine, there's all sorts of different conditions. This is just two types of birds. Imagine if that was true for every single organism and they would just die off at the first sign of, you know, drought. Obviously not a very efficient way of surviving, right? So natural selection has selected for survival and selected against not surviving. All right. What?
So did the short-beaked ones
No.
actually
No. They didn't
lower
extinct.
in, well...
Well,
lower
the
in
next time the
population,
normal
they go
season, the
somewhere
next time they
else?
got a big rain that lasted and, you know, the wet season, they came back out.
But-
And then in the next dry
Right,
season,
area
then they went back
from-
down.
From a wet area?
From what?
Did they just migrate somewhere else?
I mean, they can. I mean, they definitely have that ability because they're birds. But, I mean, most of the time, organisms stay within their little niche, their little environment. Now, you know, ducks or whoever flies south
Geese.
during the winter, I don't know, yeah.
Geese.
I mean, that's a whole other thing that I know nothing about. But as far as this is concerned, yeah, like I said, they can move. I mean, and that's survival too, right? So if you run out of resources here, well, then let's go somewhere else and find some resources. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely a possibility as well. Okay. Oh, I was going to say another example. So think back to Industrial Revolution, right? Long time ago. And so when Industrial Revolution first came about, there was factories and smog and smoke and just the air was dirty. It was all brand new. We didn't know we were, you know, messing up the ozone or whatever. And so during that time, everything kind of had this like sooty color on it, like kind of gray. Like all the trees and stuff, they were white, but now they're kind of gross and all this smog. And so before the Industrial Revolution, white moths were dominant because they would sit on the white trees and they could avoid detection by predators, right? Because they're blending in with the tree. And so it was these black moths that would be less frequent because you can imagine seeing a black moth on a white tree, it's going to stand out. So it stands out to the predators. So before the Industrial Revolution, white was the dominant. And then the Industrial Revolution came, turned everything black. So now the black moths, those are the guys that are blending in. Those are the guys that are surviving now. And now the white ones become less prevalent because they're the ones getting eaten by predators. Then we're going to go back to the beginning because after the Industrial Revolution and we start realizing, oh, maybe we're messing up our air quality a little bit. After we put in pollution controls, everything went back to being white. So now the white one is dominant again and the black one is the lesser allele. So you can have these changes in environment that literally affect the changes of organisms within that environment. You know, the moth being an example. We'll talk about other examples as well.
That's like survival of the fittest, kind of like.
That's what natural selection
Okay,
is.
but that's not adaptation. The white moth didn't now evolve to turn.
No, you're
black.
right. That is survival, but
That's
survival of
survival.
the fittest falls in with natural selection as well. That's the whole point. If you have these traits that help you survive, that's the survival of the fittest. To be fit means you have a certain characteristic or characteristics that are allowing you to survive compared to someone else.
Right. I get that. It's the evolution where the plant changes so it can survive, or the species changes so it can survive.
Well, if it's the only way that a species is going to change is if this trait is so beneficial that it helps survival. Like if we, let's just say, me, tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be telepathic. All right? I have some mutation and it's that simple and it's going to make me telepathic. Well, presumably that would be kind of a beneficial trait. Maybe help my survival a little bit. So yeah, let's just say I get married, have a kid. Now my kid's telepathic. And then eventually they get married and they have kids and they're telepathic. And then they get married and they have kids and they're all telepathic. So eventually it's going to spread. And that's why I said it, to get it to the whole population, you can't do that obviously in a short amount of time. So we're talking... Wait, what? You're going to kill me now?
Craft girl.
I didn't think I was that bad.
It's like it'll be like all over the place. Everybody will be so happy.
I mean, I don't know. I just try to think of an example off the top of my head.
She's like, that was the best one.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of something beneficial. It's like, yeah, we'll go with that. X-ray vision. I don't know, whatever.
I got you. We got you.
But the point of natural selection, like, there's not a goal of natural selection. It's not like, okay, we're trying to make the perfect organism for these set of conditions. Because the conditions are always changing, right? We've got droughts. We've got, I don't know, we've got comets coming in. We've got the ozone depleting. We have glaciers melting. There's just all sorts of stuff changing around the world all the time. So it doesn't make sense to try to pinpoint the perfect organism and try to reach that goal because it's only going to be perfect for one condition and everything's changing on the earth all the time. So instead of having a goal of making everything perfect, all it is, it's just an effect. Think of this as cause and an effect. The cause is the environment. Depending on the environment, that's going to cause adaptations in certain organisms to better survive that environment. Just like the moths. Their environment changed, and so the allele frequencies changed. So it was the white ones that were dominant. So the white allele was more frequent than the black one. And then after the Industrial Revolution, then it switched. So remember we started off saying that evolution is a change in allele frequencies. Well, at first, the white allele frequencies were up, then they were down, and then now they're back up again. And so the ironic thing is, and this is something I forgot to say, but we've been talking about dominant traits and recessive traits. Black is actually dominant to white in these moths, but yet there's more white moths. So just because you have a dominant gene, if it's bad for the survival of the race or the organism, the animal, then it's going to be weeded out through this natural selection process. So now, and by the way, those moths that I'm talking about, I'm sure y'all have seen them. I see them around Dallas all the time. They're like the white moths with the little black pepper flakes on them. That's what we're talking about here. But even though the white is the recessive allele, because you're selecting for the survival, there's going to be more of the recessive alleles in the population. And if there's more of the recessive alleles in the population, then that's going to promote more white alleles. So that's kind of, that ties directly into evolution. And so, the environment just can kind of change, on a whim. So they're doing this long-term change, and then they're also having to adapt to their specific environments as well. And so when we're talking about, survival of the fittest and adaptation, we're talking about how fit an organism is in its environment. And fitness just means how well are you surviving and passing on your traits to somebody else. And so all the different traits and all the different alleles that are out there are called the gene pool. So humans, we have a gene pool, right? Every single human has different alleles and different versions. So all of those combined are called the gene pool. And so when I see someone run across 635 in heavy traffic, it's like, okay, well, he's not going to be contributing to the gene pool anytime soon. That means he's dumb enough to run across a highway and he's going to die. And so if he's going to die, then he's not going to pass on his genes. So he's not contributing to the gene pool. In other words, he's not making the rest of us stupid. All right? So again, this is natural selection too. If you're dumb enough to run across the freaking highway, then you're... Yeah. Done. Go ahead. Get yourself out of the gene pool. I don't want future generations to be based on your stupidity. So, anyways. So the gene pool is the collective type of alleles that are present. And so you can contribute to the gene pool, or, if you get some terrible disease and you die by the age of 15, obviously you're not going to be, reproducing and passing on or contributing to the gene pool. Which is good in the case of disease, because if you have one of these terrible, terrible diseases and it kills you by the time you're 15, not to say that that's a good thing, but at least you're not passing it on to anybody else. You're stopping it right there. You're not contributing that bad allele anymore. That's, again, natural selection. Even the bad diseases, if they kill us too soon, then we can't pass them along. So they don't spread. They don't increase in concentration. You good? All right. And so this is something we kind of already talked about, but evolution is a change in gene frequency. It's a change in allele frequency. So let's go back to the moths for a second. So this is Industrial Revolution, and this is after Industrial Revolution. So all the moths are going to be black, and then after, all the moths are going to be white. So let's just focus on the black allele. So let's just say that there are 100 moths living outside of a factory that produces lots of pollution. And of those 100 individuals, we each have 2 alleles for each trait, right? So if we have 100 individuals, how many alleles do we have? 200, right? 2 for each individual. So in times of the Industrial Revolution, and I'm just going to make this up, let's just say that, 85 of them were black and 15 of them were white. So the frequency of the black is going to be, what's 85 times 2?
170.
170 out of 200. And so that comes down to a frequency of 0.85. And then the frequency of the white ones is going to be 0.15. Now, after we started putting in controls for pollution and everything, the frequency of the black alleles went down because the black individuals were dying, right? Because they stood out too much for the predators. And so now, let's just say that this flip-flop. Now you have 15% of the black ones and 85 of the white ones. So this evolution, this adaptation, it's a change in the allele frequencies. So in this example, let's just say I have 100 individuals and 64 of them are homozygous recessive for something. Then that would be, the way you calculate the frequency is literally just to divide by the number of individuals. Or you can double it just like we did, because technically, if there's 100 individuals, there's 200 alleles. So if you want to do it like we did here, you would just double the number of individuals you're looking at, so 175 over 200, but it's still going to go back to being 8.85%. So it's a fraction, it's all it is. The allele frequency, you're looking at the total population of alleles and how many is this versus how many of this. And so this evolution is based on these shifting allele frequencies over time. And so these shifts, they're not necessarily the same shift occurring for, 10 million years in a row. But again, because environment is also influencing this as well. So environment and genetics and natural selection are kind of all working together to push species forward towards more survival. All right, so there is this scientist I should say, by the name of Hardy and Weinberg, and they came up with this series of equations called the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And basically what Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is, that's a condition where you have absolutely no change in allele frequencies over time. So you have a population of people, and those allele frequencies don't change for 50 years. Now, in reality, that never happens because, like we said, things are always changing, right? We're always getting new mutations. We're always bringing in new individuals to a population, then other ones will leave. Maybe the environment changes, so that's going to change the allele frequencies. And so there's a certain set of, I guess, conditions that have to be met for a population to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And so one of those is you can't have mutations. Well, we kind of have mutations all the time. Another one is that mating is random versus non-random, because mating, if you think about it, it's not really random. I mean, it's not like, well, I guess for some organisms it might be. For humans, at least, it's not random, right? I don't just walk up to some guy and like, hey, let's mate, you know? No, you have a set of criteria and it's a process. So it's not random. You choose who you want to mate with. Most people, hopefully. So you can't have mutations. Mating has to be totally random. And there's no migration, so nothing can leave or nothing can enter. We all know that's not true. We get on a plane and fly to another country all the time. All right? The population is infinitely large, which is also not true because we have limited resources. And then natural selection isn't occurring.
Do we have to know the rules?
So they're full of it. It's really.
Yeah. I don't know why they make us still teach you this, but we have to. So yes, you do need to know the conditions that lead to Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium.
So the answer to all populations normally within HW equilibrium is no. And
They're
it's
not.
for these reasons.
Exactly, for these reasons. And so, rather than dwell on the equation, these are the reasons why it's never in Hardy-Weinberg. Because we always have mutations, because our mating is not random, because we migrate everywhere, because stuff comes into populations and some stuff leaves populations. That's what genetic drift is. And then natural selection. I mean, it's not like there's a switch for natural selection. It's like, oh, I'm just going to turn you off for a while. I mean, it's always happening. So Hardy-Weinberg, I don't want to say there's never a population in equilibrium. Like if you had a population of like maybe those like, I don't know what they're called, but over in like the deep forest of Africa that have never come in contact with humans before, and they're very, tribal, very indigenous people, and they stay in their little hole and they don't have access to outside influences. Maybe they're in Hardy-Weinberg, but there's still nothing that says, oh, by the way, just because you don't come in contact with humans, you're not going to get a mutation, right? So rarely, if at all.
So what we need to know about Hardy-Weinberg is that none of those conditions are true. Just know the 5 conditions, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, I don't understand the point of teaching it to you, but we do anyways. Okay. Don't tell anybody I said that. So natural, yeah, I know. It's going to be broadcast on the internet. Extra credit. All right, so we've already said that natural selection is selecting for the beneficial traits, and it's selecting against the non-beneficial traits. So again, in the example of the finch, in the dry season, it had the short beak, so that's non-beneficial in that particular environment. So it was selected against, that trait was selected against. And so there's kind of 3 different ways that natural selection can happen. And they're called directional, stabilizing, and disruptive. And they describe the change of organisms from one style to another. So first of all, you have the directional. The moth is the perfect example of a directional. That's between 2 extremes of a phenotype. All right, so at first, the white moths were dominant before the Industrial Revolution. And then the black ones were dominant, and then it went back to being white. So that's a perfect example of directional selection. You have one extreme phenotype is going to be the most fit, or the one that's able to help you survive the best. Another example is this disruptive. Now in this disruptive, you have 3 different options, right? You've got the extreme on this end, you've got the extreme on this end, and then you got something in the middle. Well, this disruptive, this is going to favor the extreme phenotypes over kind of the average or the mean phenotype. And then the last one, the stabilizing, that's just the opposite. Instead of having more in the extremes, you're going to have more kind of in this middle range. And so we're going to look at examples of each one of this. So in the first example, this is kind of going back to the moth thing. So depending on the tree color, some moths are going to survive better than others just because they stand out or they're more camouflaged against predation. And so this directional selection, if all the wood, at first, if you have just normal kind of wood color, then you should have kind of equal populations. But let's just say to something like, for instance, the Industrial Revolution changes the environment, changes the color of the trees. Well, again, that's going to push towards one of these extremes that are going to better survive. So the black ones survive because they can't be seen on these black trees. Right? That's directional. Now, this disruptive, same sort of thing. We've got 3 types of snails. All right? And they are living on some sort of, I don't know, wood or rock or substrate or something. But as the color of the habitat changes, so instead of having kind of a medium color rock, the rocks go to black and white, then you better believe the number of black and white snails is going to increase because those are the ones that they're out competing, they're better surviving just by being a different color. They don't even know that they're better at survival. It's just a chance of their genes and their genetics. So in this example, it's selecting for the extreme phenotypes, the light colored and the dark colored, and then the guys in between, they're kind of out of luck. Now in the last one, in the stabilizing, humans are a good example of this. So let's just say that, as is, there's kind of a wide range of the weight of newborns. But the more your newborn weighs, or the less that it weighs, you're going to have some health problems right there. You don't want your newborn to be 20 pounds, and you don't want him to be 4 pounds. You want it to be somewhere in between. That's going to help it survive better. So as a result, most children are of normal size, and there's fewer in the extremes. So that's an example of stabilizing. So stabilizing stabilizes the middle phenotype, and the disruptive favors the extreme phenotype over the one that's in the middle. And then the directional, that's just going from one phenotype to the other based on environment and conditions. Questions? Okay, so some individuals, this is kind of getting back a little bit more to the genetic stuff. So some individuals that are heterozygous for a particular trait, they're carriers in other words, so they're not affected by anything, but sometimes these heterozygotes, they actually have beneficial survival qualities. And so when this happens, this is called a balanced polymorphism. A polymorphism, and to poly means, many, and morph means to change. So when you have these polymorphisms, it's basically a really fancy way to say mutations. But these polymorphisms are actually contribute to an individual's survival. One key example, people who have sickle cell disease. Remember we talked about sickle cell, it's a recessive condition, so you need to have 2 copies. Well, if you have the 2 copies, then you've got sickle cell. There's not much you can do about it. But if you're a heterozygote, if you're a carrier of the sickle cell trait, but you're not affected, you only have 1 bad copy, that gives you resistance to malaria. So, especially, this is, in Africa, malaria is a huge issue. So people, and especially since sickle cell is more prevalent in the African American population, then it's actually almost beneficial to have sickle cell, especially if you're in that area, because malaria will just kill you. Whereas sickle cell, it kind of sucks, but it's not going to kill you. And so there's actually a survival benefit to carrying one of those bad alleles for sickle cell. And there's all sorts of examples of this. Also, if you're a carrier of the cystic fibrosis mutation, you don't have cystic fibrosis, but you're a carrier, then you're protected against other sorts of bad diarrheal diseases that we won't talk about. Also, so Children that have PKU, they don't have the ability to break down phenylalanine, which is an amino acid. But carriers of this, they are protected against miscarriage induced by a fungal toxin. So there's all sorts of weird kind of random examples of carriers of diseases that are now protected by other things. And so this is called a balanced polymorphism. Balanced because, yeah, you got the mutation, but you're not really affected by it. You're just carrying it around. But you're actually getting a benefit to having that mutation there. That's why it's called balanced. You have a mutation, but it's okay because it's not hurting you and you're actually getting a benefit out of it. Okay, so there's other different types of selection. Sexual selection is one of them. There are actually two types of sexual selection that we're going to talk about. But first, I'm going to talk about sexual dimorphism. Again, morph is change, di means two. And so sexual dimorphism, what it is, it's a fancy way of saying that of a particular species, the males might look different than the females. Which, I mean, we have sexual dimorphism. You know, our males and females don't look like the same. And so the example I like to use is the peacock. You know, the males, they have that huge, gorgeous tail, right? That's a way to attract females. It's like, ooh, I'm pretty, look at me, you want to mate with me. And at the same time, because he's got that big tail, even though it might attract more females, it's also going to attract more predators, right? So that's why you don't see peacocks that have tails that are 20 feet long. It's going to slow them down, right, if something's trying to eat it. So anyways, these males, they have these big, bright feathers that are there to attract certain females. And the females don't have that. You know, so there's all sorts of examples of this. I mean, humans, like we said, males obviously look different than females. Most of them anyways. But these differences in males and females can often lead to, you know, increase in predation. So it's nice to have big, pretty flowers, but you don't want to be too over the top, otherwise it's going to weigh you down. And you don't want to be too below, because if it's not big enough, then you're not going to attract any females. So you can find that happy medium, where it's not going to kill you, and it's still going to get you the nice lady peacock. All right, so sexual selection, like we said, it's a type of natural selection, and there's actually two different things that can come of it. And one of them is called intrasexual selection, and the other one is intersexual selection. So intra means between. So intrasexual means between the sexes. So male to male or female to female. In intrasexual selection, yeah, you're going to have either males competing for a female, most of the case, or occasionally you might get females fighting for a male. But here, these rams, you know, they're butting heads because they're competing. They're competing for this nice little lady ram that you can't see. Whereas an intersexual, this is literally the choosing of your mate by a female looking for a male or a male looking for a female, or even homosexuality in that case. And so here, the bugs are getting it on, right? You got a male bug, female bug, they chose each other and now they're mating, okay? That is intersexual. So intra means between, so of the same species, and inter means, I forget what it means, but it means like between two different sources. So male to female is inter, and then either male on male or female on female is intra. What'd you say, Cameron?
Intra is like internal.
Is what?
Internal between like the same sex.
Yeah. Like intracontinental and intercontinental. I mean, yeah.
Well, intra, they're actually competing. Inter, they're choosing.
They're exactly. Yeah. So competing for mates versus choosing your mates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, again, mating is not random. It's not like that male bug really likes that female bug and vice versa, I guess. I don't know. All right. Yes.
In the species, is it like the praying mantis, the females kill off the males after they mate? How does that population not go extinct? They're always killing all these males.
Excuse me. That is, I don't know. I've never thought about that.
It's like the black widow.
I mean, you have to get to where you have more female than male.
You would think so if they ate them all the time.
Yeah.
Or do they always eat them all the time?
That's what I
mean,
don't know.
I know that they are known to do that, but I don't
Will the
know.
male notice? No.
What?
So the male should run away right afterwards?
Yeah, maybe the male is faster, can fly away. Maybe he's
Right.
smart. He's like, wait, my buddy, he's been missing for a while. Maybe it's a bad idea. I mean, I don't know. But obviously, like I said, this survival is intrinsic to all of us. So somehow they're finding a way to survive.
Or do they produce more males than females?
Maybe, yeah, maybe there's a, yeah, exactly. Maybe,
Balance it out?
yeah, exactly. Maybe evolution or adaptation has allowed for when you have, I guess, a batch of baby praying mantis, most of them are males.
Or males.
There's more males than females. Yeah, so there's something at play there, and I don't know what it is. I'm sure somebody knows, but I don't know. I don't know much about praying mantis.
Why do they kill them though? That's the crazy part.
Again, I don't know.
They don't like it,
Domination.
or-
I don't know. I mean, same thing. Why do male seahorses carry the babies?
Really?
Right.
Male seahorses carry the babies.
Can you go back
Like
down
a-
to the next previous slide?
Previous slide, yeah.
They don't produce them, they just carry them.
Well, they mate and then the male carries.
They carry
This is
them,
not
yeah.
gonna be this for you.
Just like, you know,
Oh,
the
okay,
penguins, the
we can
male,
have it.
like king penguins, they'll carry around a little egg with them and protect it. Even
Did
though,
you correct this slide?
did I what?
Correct it since it's been posted?
No, is there something that's
Printed
different?
the same definition twice. It says members of one sex choose their mate.
Members of the same sex.
Right, but on the side when they
compete.
printed, it came off the same.
Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe
The same
I
definition.
uploaded the wrong one. So, I mean, this is correct.
Okay.
So if you need to change it, maybe I posted the wrong one. 'Cause I think at one point this was incorrect and I changed it on here, but then uploaded the wrong one. So that's probably the
Can
case.
you upload the right one?
Say no. Get them.
Write it
Cross it out.
Just
No.
write it down.
Because I think that's literally the only mistake in here.
Okay.
So it's not like it's all
We
over
know.
the place.
Everyone is hitting us.
Okay, so we've been spending this time talking about natural selection and adaptation, which is kind of the main mechanism of evolution. But there's also a few more that we're going to talk about. And don't get anxious, we'll be out of here sooner than later. But there are certain conditions that also affect evolution. One of them is called genetic drift. And this is literally just a change in allele frequencies randomly. So random mutation here will change the allele frequency. Another random mutation there will change the allele frequency. It's just random mutations. Random changes in your genes. That's genetic drift. That can also influence evolution. Also, the founder effect. And so I alluded to this earlier. When you have these populations, let's just say that there's a huge nuclear war, and everyone in America is dead except for 100 people. Whatever the traits of those 100 people are that are surviving, that's what the new generation, the new population individuals is going to have.
Nuclear war, there'd be a lucky
I'm
100
just-
people.
I'm not good at giving examples, clearly. I'm just trying to do it so y'all can understand. Another example, we use the Amish, right? The Amish, they're secluded. They isolate themselves from everybody else. And so when they go into their little, I don't know, Amish communities, like I said, they don't interact, they breed with themselves, right? There's kind of this interbreeding going on. And so some of these non-beneficial traits that might be present, because they're just kind of recycling all around, these kind of recessive traits can become more active or can be seen more. And so if you take a close look at this picture,
Everybody look alike.
this child has 6 fingers.
Oh, I my.
1, 2, 3, 4,
At
5,
one point,
6.
they say 6 fingers are more common than 5.
Yeah, because, well, 6, the trait for polydactyly, which is multiple fingers, it's a dominant trait. So just like dwarfism, you only need that one copy.
Right.
But just because it's more prevalent, just because it's dominant, doesn't mean the more individuals. So think about the moth example. Just because black was dominant doesn't mean they're dominant now. So it's all the conditions. But anyways, in these, a lot of these Amish communities, you know, if these were Amish people with these random traits that coded for, you know, multiple fingers, if they were diluted out into the rest of the population, then we wouldn't see that many. But because they're sitting there and they're just literally exchanging, swapping alleles, we're getting no fresh genetic variation. So they just end up, a lot of them will end up with these, what would otherwise be normal, children with an occasional polydactyly. Now it's just circling around them.
Everybody's got that same look.
I don't know about that. That kind of depressed me. But another example, there's a Hasidic Jew population, I believe in, I want to say Jerusalem, I could be wrong. But there's a Hasidic Jew population, same thing. They isolate themselves from everybody else and they've got all this breeding going on. You see all these recessive conditions come to light because they're just passing around these bad alleles to one another. And so when you have more of recessive alleles in a small population, they're going to show up more than if you have that same number but diluted out into the normal population with everybody else.
Do you increase the chances of new mutations happening as well?
Yeah, I would think so.
Since they're just sharing the same gene?
But this is why inbreeding is against the law, because when your genetics are so similar and there's no genetic variation, you end up with all of these abnormalities, like developmental abnormalities, intelligent abnormalities. And so when you're too close, when you're not introducing genetic diversity, things tend to go a little wrong. And so kind of an example of this. All right, we're almost done. All right, so another thing that can affect evolution is what's called the bottleneck effect. And so this is kind of relevant to the dinosaur talks, right? So before, we had all these dinosaurs and they had all these different alleles, and then came this huge ice age that knocked all the dinosaurs out. And only a couple of them might have survived.
I thought it was a big kid.
Whatever, I don't know what it is. Yeah, quit making my job hard.
That's not the fun of it.
Okay, you want to make your test hard?
Just it.
All right, so the bottleneck effect, you have, everything's normal, peachy, you got dinosaurs roaming around, there's all sorts of different alleles and variation, and then the meteor comes and knocks out 95% of them. Well, now you're only left with just a few different alleles. So again, the thought is, you're only using some of those variations that were there because a lot of them died off. And so now the new effect is going to be based on those surviving alleles. So whatever got destroyed, got destroyed. If there was some really cool trait for like X-ray vision in the dinosaurs that we didn't know about, and then they all died, well, we just lost X-ray vision, because of that meteor. Obviously another terrible example, but I'm just trying to make a point here.
That was an awesome example.
Thank you. Dinosaurs with X-ray vision. All right, so another type of thing that can affect evolution is called non-random mating. So like we said, non-random mating, this occurs all the time. And so because mating is usually not random, this is going to concentrate alleles. So in other words, think of it this way. If you meet your husband or meet your wife and you settle down and you have kids, your alleles are concentrated, right? So you're all living as a family. And so that concentrates some of these alleles due to non-random mating. And then the other thing that can affect evolution is gene flow. And gene flow is literally just migration of organisms in and out of a population. So you got a population of gray rabbits and you got a population of brown rabbits. One of the gray rabbits goes and hangs out with the brown rabbits. And then they mate, and then that introduces the gray into the population. Same thing vice versa. If the brown comes over to the gray, the genes will mix, will bring more variation into the population, which is always good for the species.
Is that like is that similar to skin color in humans? Like as far as, I don't know, white and black?
Oh, you mean rabbits? Yeah, they've got like dominant coat colors or whatever. It's just a gene, yeah, it's just like, skin color, like we said, it's a little complicated because there's multiple genes. But like, we talked about like labs, right? Like they've got a coat color, they've got a gene that controls the coat color, they've got a gene that controls their coat color. It's just all about increasing the variation. So this brown rabbit, who's to say that the only difference between the brown rabbit and the tan rabbit is the coat color? There's probably lots of other differences as well. So, this is used as a simple example, but you got to remember, he's got other traits that are probably different as well. And so he's mixing those into the population as well.
So you wouldn't be able to say that
You'd have to sequence both of their genomes in order to compare how much genetic diversity you're really introducing. So you obviously know you're at least introducing one trait, but nature favors genetic diversity. So even if you can change one trait and maybe it's just fur color, why not?
Isn't there a lot of random mating though in animals?
There is some random mating, but at the same time, there's all these other behavioral things like pheromones. Like when dogs, when they're in heat, sending off those signals, they'll be more, or I guess will bring more gentleman callers than those that are not ovulating or whatever. So there's lots, it's complicated. There's lots of things going on. So yes, there can be random mating. But usually there's to us it's random because we just see two dogs humping each other. But that doesn't mean the dogs weren't attracted to one another on some sort of level through some, I don't know, doggy intuition. I don't know. So, I mean, yeah, it's a valid point. But I think there's other things that are going on there that just because we're not understanding it, we don't see. Okay, so last couple of slides, these are just summary slides. Basically saying the different ways that evolution can come about, and there's 5 of them. And so this one on top, this is showing Hardy-Weinberg, which we know Hardy-Weinberg. Rarely nothing is in Hardy-Weinberg. So this is what it would look like if there was no mutation, no genetic drift, non-random mating, blah, blah, blah. And so everything under that is the things that do contribute to evolution. So we've got natural selection. We've talked about several examples about how certain organisms have certain beneficial traits and it allows them to survive and then pass those traits on. The snails, the moths, the beaks, take your pick. There's also mutation. Bacteria. Going from a normal bacteria to a resistant bacteria. That's also going to affect the variation of gene alleles, which again, evolution is just a change in allele frequency. Some alleles become more prevalent than others, and then maybe the environment changes, and then maybe it goes back to the way it was. But it's the environment and the selection that are playing a role with one another. You also have this genetic drift. So in these kind of chance events that decrease the amount of alleles in a population, like the bottleneck effect, that's going to decrease the number of alleles, and it's going to change the allele frequency. So for example, here, you see the yellow is at a frequency of 18%, but here it's only at 0.01, or I guess 0.1%. So these change in allele frequencies that ultimately lead to evolution. Also this non-random mating. So when you have non-random mating, you're going to have individuals with more opportunities to mate. And so based on who you mate with, the traits of you and your mate are the ones that are going to be passed on. So depending on who you choose to mate with, that's also going to have an effect on the different allele characteristics of future generations. And then finally you have this gene flow. So this is where you get migration of certain individuals or certain characteristics either in or out of a certain population.
So that's 6.
You do not count Hardy-Weinberg.
Okay.
Hardy-Weinberg is like, by default, if there was none of this stuff going on, which we know there is, if there was none of this stuff going on, you would have absolutely no change in allele frequencies. That means all of us, there would be no genetic variation. We'd all look the same. It'd be boring. It'd be blah. It'd be bland.
So that's the 5 mechanisms.
Yeah, the 5 mechanisms, you've got genetic drift, non-random mating, gene flow, mutation, and natural selection. So if you look on your review sheet, it says, describe the 5 mechanisms of evolution. Well, there they are. Bam.
Did you post that today, the review?
I did. It's already posted.
You snuck
It's
it
in
in
an
there. on
email.
I snuck it in on an email. It wouldn't let me attach it on the announcements. I guess I could have put it on the course materials, but I just emailed it to you. If you want, I'll go back and post it in Blackboard. That's fine. I can put it under. Actually, I think I do have a file for reviews. I don't know. I'll get it up there.
Since we're not getting a review for this one, can you post the answers?
Ouch! Ooh.
Girl, that was bold, I like that.
So-
We're
Studying the correct information. I mean, I've got a lot of it.
You've got the correct information.
Like, some of the questions.
I purposely deleted all the answers, because y'all did better on the test where I deleted the answers. Versus, oh, yes you did.
Made more
Yes,
sense
you
if we
did.
had
That
less
was a
chapters
great
to
review. Last
study.
review was a
We
really
had
good
less
review.
chapters.
It was the
Yeah, there was less
closest
chapters.
It's been of all of the tests.
We only had 3
Yeah.
this time.
It was what?
It was the closest to
So
the
the
test
questions.
that,
Oh, the second
all
review?
3 tests we've taken, that was the best review.
Oh, last
closest to
review.
the test.
This one, I made this review today.
Okay.
And I literally sat in front of the PowerPoints and made it. So this one will go nicely with the exam.
Okay.
And I posted a lot more questions just because I wanted to be thorough and make sure I didn't ask you something that I didn't at least give you fair warning about. So there's more questions, but a lot of them kind of overlap too.
Maybe you can give answers to the tricky ones?
Or short
No,
answer.
the real question is, what are the short answers gonna be like? Like, what are you
saying?
your thoughts there?
Like this would be a short answer?
That would be a really long, short answer. But I could say compare and contrast gene flow and non-random mating. Or say, how does the bottleneck effect contribute to evolution? Or how does the founder effect lead to changes in allele populations? Stuff like that. The stuff that's more than just a one-word answer. And so it's more the stuff that we discuss. Like I could say, compare and contrast natural selection and evolution. You say natural selection is over a shorter period of time and involves adaptation to environmental conditions, and then evolution is natural selection over a really, really, really long time.
We'll be looking for
Or
that
you could
question.
really challenge us and say, sum this up in 1 sentence, 10 words or less.
That would
You
be
get some
amazing.
interesting
Easier to grade.
Put that answer,
I know,
that
right?
question that you just asked, and answer it on the test.
In 3 words or less, describe.